Good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday morning, and a very, very warm welcome to you from Penn Vicarage. Hope you're well and cheerful, and thank you for being with us today as we continue through the book of Hosea. Now, today is one of the most remarkable chapters, I think, in the entire Bible. Hosea and chapter 11 is an absolute beauty. I remember reading it as a parish assistant when I was in Buxton about 30 years ago. And the priest I was working with said, when you read this, read it with the passion. So I shall endeavour to do this, and hopefully the passion will help you get something out of it. I'll give it my best shot. Here goes. When Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt, I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. They shall return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me. The sword rages in their cities. It consumes their oracle priests and devours them because of their schemes. My people are bent on turning away from me. To the Most High they call, but he does not raise them at all. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. They shall go after the Lord, who roars like a lion. When he roars, his children shall come trembling from the west. They shall come trembling from the bird, like birds from Egypt, and from doves from the land of Assyria. And I will return them to their homes, says the Lord. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I gave it my best shot. I hope that helps you get the picture of it. It starts off by a beautiful picture. When Israel was a child, I loved him. I notice here that they're not loved because of anything they've deserved to do. But from the very beginning, when Israel was a child, I loved him. From the very off, God is saying, I loved you like my child. And so, but like I say, notice it's grace love. It's not deserved love. It's not merited. They've not done anything to deserve it. But from the very beginning, God says, I loved you, Israel. And he goes on to say, and out of Egypt, I called my son. Interesting, that's quoted in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 2, verse 15, when, of course, you have the return of Jesus after he went into exile into Egypt. Mary and Joseph brought the infant Jesus back after they'd escaped Herod. And it's interesting that in the Old Testament, of course, you have God's people being rescued from Egypt, from slavery in Egypt, and God called them out under Moses. And of course, here in the New Testament, you have Jesus returning from Egypt to a place of safety as well. So it's the same kind of thing here. But as I say, in case you wonder where you've heard that before, it's Matthew chapter 2, verse 15. Out of Egypt, I called my son. And he goes on, though, to say that, and yet you can feel the beating heart of God here. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. So God loved his people from the beginning, okay? He called them. And yet, the more he says, the more I called them, the more they turned away from me, like spoiled kids, really. And he goes on in verses 3 and 4 to carry on this beautiful image of a father and a child. And here you have, it was I, he says, I taught Ephraim to walk. I taught them up. I picked them up. I took them up in my arms. So again, this lovely picture of a dad or a parent teaching the child to walk. You got to pick them up, and I remember doing it. And you got to teach your children to walk. And God's this lovely image, isn't it, of this Almighty God teaching is like a father teaching his child to walk. So God is teaching his child. God is teaching Ephraim to walk as well. And he goes on in verse 4, I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to the cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. So not only did he crouch down and went down with them, again, like a good parent, crouching down to eat with their child, but also a lovely picture of a parent picking their child up, hugging them to the cheek like that. So from the very beginning, you have the fact that God is saying to Israel, even when you were a child, I loved you. I loved you from the off. I called you. I rescued you. I called you out of Egypt. And yet the more I called you, the more I called them, he says, the further they went away. And he goes through what says, remarkable. Yet I was like a father who taught you how to walk, and I healed you when you got hurt. I led them with human kindness. I was like those who lift infants to the cheeks, and I bent down to them and fed them. A beautiful picture of a really, really good parent teaching their child, being with them, loving them, caring for them, calling them, being with them. It's a beautiful picture of everything that parenthood really, really should be. And yet, he says, the more I called them, the more they turned from me. And in verses 5 to 7, you have kind of what should happen, that it says that by all things being equal, this is what's coming to them. And if you want to kind of follow this through, really, watch the word turn in these structures. So it says, they shall return to the land of Egypt, because they have refused to return to me. And he goes on in the end to say, my people are bent on turning away from me. So again, you can see that my people are bent on turning away from me. They've refused to return to me. Therefore, they will return to the land of Egypt. So you can kind of see this is what kind of should happen. These people have turned away from God, God says, and so therefore this is what by right should be coming to them. They should return to the land of Egypt. But then, somewhere between verses 7 and 8, there's a remarkable change in God's tone. God's tone changes completely. And he goes from saying what kind of should happen to what's going to happen. Because he goes on to say, how can I give you Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? Instead of Admah and Zeboim, by the way, are places near Sodom and Gomorrah, when God puts sulfur on them, in the book of Genesis. Admah and Zeboim were kind of caught up in that. So what God is saying is, how can I treat you like happened to Admah and Zeboim all those years ago? And he goes to say, my heart recoils in me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I shall not fear. I shall not destroy I shall not execute my anger. I will not again. And interesting, his reason why, because I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. It's interesting what we tend to think of as godliness. We tend to think as godlike, being almighty. And yet here, the chief characteristic of godness here is God's compassion. God is quite capable of pouring oil on sulfur and brimstone, fire and brimstone on these people, and that's what they deserve. But the reason he doesn't is because his compassion is too great. God's great characteristic here is not his power. He's got the power to do it, but it's God's amazing compassion, which is why he doesn't, why he loves his people too much, and therefore he just can't do it. And I do think it's interesting as we approach Good Friday and Easter, and as we consider again what Jesus did. What was God doing in Jesus? John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, Jesus Christ. By rights, the mess that we've made of the world, God had been quite within his rights to blow us away or disown us. But like we have in this chapter, but God so loved the world that he gave his only son for us. And again, there's similar verses in Romans chapter 5, if you want to look it up later as well. Romans 5 verses 6 to 8, he says this, for while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. Indeed, rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person, someone might actually dare to die. But God proves his love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. and so on. So you get the amazing grace and the amazing love of God. So this fabulous chapter, Hosea chapter 11, it's a real purple passage, this one. It's an absolute beauty. Here you have expressed so clearly and with such wonderful images here, the amazing grace of God, the love of God, that God loved his people like a good parent. The fact he loved them, he called them, he spent time with them, he taught them how to walk, he healed them, he led them towards cause of kindness. He's like a bit like a parent crouching down to eat with the children. He's like a good parent picking up, holding them to the cheek. That's how God loved his people. Yet they turned away and kept going elsewhere instead. And by rights, they should go back to Egypt. By rights, they should go back to Assyria. But instead, God just can't do it because he says, how can I give you up? How can I treat you like I did Sodom and Gomorrah? Because I am God and not a man. I'm a holy one in your midst and will not come in wrath. Which reminds us of the amazing, incredible love of God shown to us in Jesus. That God loved the world so much that he gave his only son. And that while we were still sinners, Christ gave his life for us. And that is what Good Friday and Easter is all about. And my friends, may you know God's love in your heart today. God's truly amazing grace with you this day. Thank you for watching. Enjoy your Tuesday. Please do share this message with your friends. It's a wonderful message. God bless you and have a lovely day.